Good morning and welcome back to the lecture series on partition of India in print media and cinema. So, we are discussing on the accounts of the survivor, and today we are going to start our discussion on Bapsi Sidhwa's important novel called Cracking India. So, when we talk of cracking India, the dyad, the Hindu-Muslim dyad, is further destabilized through the presence of a third perspective, a third position, that of the Indian Parsees. The Parsees, a small community of Parsees that live in India. So, this 1991 novel by Bapsi Sidhwa is set in Lahore, and the narrator is a child named Lenny, who is 5 at the beginning of the narrative, and she turns 10 at the novel's close. So, this could be seen as a journey of a juvenile and a story of her right, a story of her entry into adulthood and a rite to passage kind of narrative, where she loses her innocence in due course as the country gains independence at the expense of the subcontinent being disinterred. So, it is the story of it's a rite to passage. It's a kind of it's a story of a child growing up, where we see that in due course the country gains independence, and yet at the expense of the subcontinent being divided into different post-colonial nations. So, we see that Lenny moves about the city of Lahore between her family's houses and observes the actions of the adults with her solicitous eyes. So, she is a special case. She has a polio stricken right leg, and so the entire narrative, as we see, escalates from a situation from a humdrum life, from a kind of ensconced life that Lenny is living with her Parsee parents, an upper middle class or affluent neighborhood where she belongs, till the political tensions give way to mob riots, fires, and murders and incendiary. So, Lenny's narrative shifts its focus to the topic of partition, as the entire Lahore, the entire city of Lahore is consumed by violence. So, the Parsees' position is as unique as Lenny's right leg, polio stricken leg. They are actually, they strike out as a unique people or population among Indians, just as the Hindus, Muslims and Sikhs are fighting among themselves, and so they are generally considered as safe from the violence that is largely initiated by and directed towards these three communities, Hindus, Muslims and Sikhs. So, there is this coincidence we see in the narrative between Lenny's 8th birthday and the creation of the new nation of Pakistan, to which she would henceforth belong. So, this is a moment that inscribes, the moment in which Lenny's narrative begins to consider what it means to have survived the partition. So, starting from the story of a Parsee household, a mundane life, a humdrum life, the story transitions to recording the experience of trauma and survival. So, in the post-partition period. So, Lenny all of a sudden acquires a newly possessed Pakistani identity, and this newly assigned identity affirms her status as a survivor of partition. So, at first, like I said, the narrative of cracking India seems to be about a young girl and her experience of her neighborhood, of the people and family surrounding her during the time of partition. And yet, as the novel progresses, Lenny's attempt at understanding the meaning of partition, at intercepting with the ongoings of partition, her experiences, her interceptions go on to document and record something that becomes a major chapter in history. It goes on to record a historical event and something that is also remembered as a traumatic chapter, a chapter remembered with a chapter poignantly remembered later on. So, it is within this narrative shift that Lenny's role as a narrator becomes complicated. So, there is this inability to fully experience and witness the partition as a trauma. Lenny's narrative is initially captured through her innocent eyes, the eyes of a juvenile that lack any kind of worldly experience. However, her youthful first person narrative is subsequently interrupted by an older voice that is trying to remember these disturbed times and trying to understand, decipher and explain the meanings of whatever Lenny experiences through hindsight. So, these moments of interruption attempts to unfold or kind of unpack, understand about the violence tearing through the streets and houses of Lahore. So, Lenny's inability to explain everything, or the gap that is present between the juvenile narrator's voice and the adult trying to decipher meanings through retrospection corroborates the fact about how fiction, how it is only within the failure of fiction that testimony to the trauma of partition can be most poignantly voiced. It is only through within this failure of fiction, this inexplicability, that trauma of the partition can most poignantly be voiced or described or let us say portrayed. So, the narrative follows a guided tour of a small section of an affluent neighborhood in the city of Lahore, and so we see the reader takes a tour with Lenny through Warris Road, Queen's Road and Jail Road, and locates the house of some of these characters in the novel, such as the electric aunt and godmother. And so, this guided tour actually becomes a search for refuge from the perplexing unrealities, of my home on Warris Road. So, what is this unreality of the Parsee existence? Lenny's voice quickly shifts its focus from her unreal address, her kind of unreal positioning on Warris Road, and focuses on her polio stricken right leg. And So one understands, the reader understands that there is a kind of analogy between the two, between the polio stricken leg and the perplexing unreality pertaining to her geographical location. So in both instances one understands, I mean her leg could be seen, different critics have seen Lenny's polio stricken leg as symbol for and representing different things. It could be a foot that is broken and recast into a functional position, could mean the cracking of the nation. So it could be a synecdoche of what the nation is going through, the larger happenings, the happenings at the level of level of microcosm. So at a macrocosmic level. So the happenings at a macrocosmic level and her leg. So Lenny is forced to undergo multiple surgeries where her foot is broken and recast into a functional position. And so we understand that the Parsee community also has had to, historically speaking readjust with the larger Indian scenario, with the existing populace. And there is a story that is narrated in this narrative by Sidhwa, where the narrator recounts how the first Parsee how the Parsee settlers came to India during the Mughal period. I mean, their presence would sweeten the or have a positive impact on Indian society without actually claiming a lot of visibility, a kind of a minority that never became extremely visible. So that is a unique position that is also symbolized through this polio stricken leg. And there is this fear that the child Lenny constantly feels. She is perplexed and worries that these surgeries, the multiple surgeries on her foot will completely reshape it and transform her otherwise unique identity. So the operations on her foot and the different operations and experiments that the society undergoes, the fabric of the nation is undergoing different changes. So until a few days back, Lahore was part of undivided India, and after the partition, Lahore becomes part of a new nation state called Pakistan. And so just like Lenny becomes a Pakistani, her foot is also being made to brook different experiments, different operations on it. So we see that the foot and the nation are kind of an analogy. Through the foot we understand the change, how the texture, how the fabric of the nation actually undergoes several changes. So scholarship on cracking India argue that Lenny's broken leg embodies the breaking of Pakistan from India, and it tells the story of a broken nation as well as the story of a new nation that is born out of a violent divide. So Lenny understands how and Lenny actually grows up in a household where there are too many females. So unconsciously she acquires a pacifist attitude, and so she describes how the elders, and at a later stage she goes on to say how the males are actually responsible for all the destruction and war. And so the elders have actually bequeathed a war-ridden childhood to the current generation, and this is something that becomes obvious, that becomes apparent when the Second World War gets over, and the question of partition is looming. So Lenny refers to how the dominant the atmosphere of war pervades her childhood. So Lenny refers to how the question of partition, as well as the Second World War at the backdrop, actually shaped her childhood and took away a chunk of her childhood actually. She says, "I who have subversively hoped that the defector Bose and the Japanese enemy win the war. All the same, I am swept by a sense of relief so unburdening that I realize I was born with an awareness of the war. And I recall the dim, faraway fear of bombs that tinged with bitterness my mother's milk. No wonder I was a colicky baby." So, Lenny helps the reader delve into the confused perspective of children that are witnessing the partition. So, this is where Bapsi Sidhwa's novel actually tends to fill in a gap and actually renders a unique perspective, an additional point of view that revisits the closed Hindu-Muslim Sikh narrative or dialogue. So, we have a specially abled juvenile Parsee child's perspective here. The concept of partition for Lenny is merely digging a deep canal. So, here we also see how the mainstream nation and the local ideas meet each other through a kind of simulacrum, a kind of telltale fairy tale prism, where realities or where there are as such no realities or no reality, but realities, and realities actually are made to stand on their head. So, people have their localized beliefs, that topsy-turvy, the larger happenings, the larger nationalistic happenings, by the times these happenings or these decisions, political decisions by major high-flying national actors reach the local microcosm. By the time they reach the microcosm, their proportions change, and so do their meanings. So, the presence, for example, the imagination of a deep canal that would be drawn, that would be dug between two countries, is a case in hand. So, Lenny, and this is something, once again we call this telltale because Lenny has got to know about this purported canal and its design from her ayah, who is also subaltern existence. So, she says that a new nation is born. India has been divided after all. Did they dig the long canal ayah mentioned? So, this is how stories brew up, stories that are half baked and unverified, and they have this fairy tale quality to them. So, like children from her time, Lenny's childhood is affected by the turmoil, and so although she lays claim to fairy tales like other children of her age, the content of these fairy tales are very different. They engage with the question of violence, question of conflict, and the question of human dignity and it being and human dignity and human loss. So despite the fact that Lenny represents a group of people such as the Parsees that are not under direct threat during the bifurcation, her daily life is impacted by the happenings, the riots, nevertheless. So, she witnesses the riots and the murders. So, we see that on the day of her birthday, the elders are too traumatized by the ongoings, and so the happiness, the joy is actually marred. And we understand the children born during this time, regardless of the class or the socioeconomic background they come from, actually lose a part of their childhood because of these disturbances. So, the author refers to the child protagonist and the narrator's lost childhood in an instance where Aya actually discovers Lenny's white hair. So, this is also very symbolic, where Lenny's white hair is discovered, and to this she expresses her surprise that all her hair has not already turned white. So, we see this kind of this is a treatment that we have earlier seen in Manto 2, how the child's alternative perspective actually amplifies the carnage, the animosity, right. So, Lenny, we see that there is a point where Lenny is offering her birthday cake to another child whose mother has been raped and murdered, and the child in question actually hails from a much poorer background as compared to Lenny, and the child has never actually heard of a cake, and he in turn beseeches Lenny and her cousin to play marbles with him. And so, we see that children's experiences are also variegated, they cannot be put under one blanket, and yet it is extremely pathetic that children come to terms with, children discover many adult truths. They talk about rape, they enact rape in their games, in casual dialogues. We see children are trying to know about and discuss about rape. There is a point where Lenny and her cousin point to a few women that have been violated by perpetrators, and they call them Giri hui aurat, emulating an adult expression. Of course, this is how the mainstream society look at the molested, violated women, and so they say that these are Giri hui aurats, just following the adults, the way the adults speak. So, children are learning the common parlance, the common words that are used by the adults during the partition, and Lenny's innocence is misused by the ice candy man. When he is when he in the end, we see that he is extracting the information about Aya through deceiving Lenny. So, it becomes a lifetime lesson for Lenny, where in all probability the question of trust is something she loses. So I mean, her trust is broken by a friend. She was extremely fond of the ice candy man, and yet he is the architect of Aya's abduction. So he is the chief architect of Aya's abduction. So, the entire narrative is actually motivated in a way to purge the adult narrator's guilt that she has been carrying inside her since she divulged about Aya. So, this narrative is a way of setting oneself free from a sense of or relieving oneself from a sense of guilt, confessing something wrong that one has done to a friend, a close friend. So, Ice Candy Man suddenly becomes an enemy to Aya, and he actually extracts information about Aya by deceiving Lenny, and within seconds Lenny later realizes that her trust has been broken, and so it leads to a scarring experience for Lenny, and with this incident she loses a part of her innocent self, and the question of trust is something that she has to deal with for the rest of her life. Like I said, the entire narrative is actually motivated by purging a sense of guilt. So, the process of writing is a way of confessing the wrong that one has done to a friend. So, in the initial phase when the partition massacres reach out to these localities in Lahore, they do so merely as tales, and so there are surprises, questions, and there are disbeliefs in the characters. So, for example, when Sharbat Khan tells the Aya of the unknown dead bodies that are being found, Aya inquires if these dead people are from if these dead people belong to the Hindu religion, and Sharbat Khan retorts that Hindu, Muslim and Sikh, one can tell they are from prosperous eating drinking households. So, this kind of interruption by this preemption by Aya is intentional in the story, where the author reminds the readers that a body actually has no religion. So, it is only through our social and cultural space that we acquire a religious identity. So, the novel, from its humdrum, ordinary and in a way a merry existence, it transitions to massacre. So, the turn of the events tell the readers that partition will be inevitable after a point. So, it starts off from a period when the partition murders were more of rumors than reality for the larger section, and then the situation transitions slowly to unraveling dead bodies, and so one finds dead bodies everywhere, and there is a rift between the religious and so the rift between the religious communities gradually increase. So, one see there is a point where the people from the subaltern sections would eat and indulge in merrymaking together regardless of their religious identity, and yet subsequently at the turn of events the friends from different communities get divided on the basis of their religious identity. So, so the processions, the riots, murders, rapes and the gory truth of the partition becomes more and more evident with the progression of the narrative. So, as the partition massacres become intense, the identity of the people are synonymous with their religion. So, there is this shift in the child's perspective, where for the first time Lenny realizes that Aya hails from Hindu community, that she is a Punjabi Hindu woman. So, the common people, as the child understands, were away from decision making, rather the decisions were imposed on them, and yet they bore the brunt of partition. Regarding the protagonists, the high flying leaders, Lenny expresses her surprise that they actually existed and that they are indeed not mythic figures, someone we would only hear about and never see. So, this shows the distance between the common people and the leaders, and how there is this an inexcruciating gap between the real and the imaginary, the imagined leader and the leader that actually exists. So, so this distance between the leaders and the people, there is this incommensurable gap, and so the leaders are imagined as parts of glorified narratives who do not or cannot be located or related with the reality or the real happenings in the common people's lives. So, these leaders cannot be connected, cannot be identified with the happenings in the ordinary people's lives, So, the helplessness of the commoners regarding the new boundaries and the way the nations would be churned out becomes evident through the arguments among the local people. So, the Messier, for example, says that if the Punjab is divided, Lahore is going to become a part of Pakistan because a Muslim majority population lives there, and yet another man, the butcher, actually retorts saying that a lot of moneyed, wealthy, a wealthy section of Hindus actually live in Lahore. So, where will they go? They own most of the property and business in the city. So, this confusion regarding the new boundaries loom over the common people, and the debates keep going on, and with these debates the bitterness actually becomes evident after a point. So, the debates, the uncertainties lead to a bitterness, and it also exposes the helplessness of the people in the face of this cataclysm. So, so the fate of so many people to be decided by a handful, right? Someone that one has, the leaders that one has never seen. And so, we see that the people, the Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, all of them subalterns working in rich people's houses, or doing odd jobs, who used to eat together, suddenly start squabbling. They engage in petty fights, and there are disagreements. And these people also start, they take on different colors, the colors of the community. Suddenly, they deck themselves up in skull caps, and the Hindus start going, visiting, frequenting to the temples and worshipping the gods. So, suddenly they acquire their communal identity. Lenny expresses her frustration at the leaders and says that what is the point of talking so much about people that we do not even know. So, the child is unable to comprehend the scenario, the chaos and the changes that are visible in long standing relationships. And so, through the child's lens, see, one can actually through the child's lens, Sidhwa is actually criticizing this decision of partition that was imposed on the commoners from above. And so, I would like to conclude today's lecture with this excerpt from Ismat Chughtai's Jadein. It's the quotation, the excerpt is in Hindi, it's in Urdu, Devanagari script, but I could read it. दोनों खानदानों की मौजूदा 3 पीढ़ियाँ एक दूसरे से ऐसी घुली मिली थी कि सुबह भी न था कि हिंदुस्तान की तकसीम के बाद इस मोहब्बत में फूट पड़ जाएगी। हालांकि दोनों खानदानों में मुस्लिम लीगी, कांग्रेसी और महासभाई मौजूद थे और मजहबी और सियासी वैसे भी जम कर होती, मगर ऐसे ही जैसे फुटबॉल या क्रिकेट मैच होते हैं। इधर अब्बा कांग्रेसी थे तो उधर डॉक्टर साहब और बड़े भाई लीगी थे, तो उधर ज्ञानचंद महासभाई, इधर मंझले भाई कम्युनिस्ट थे तो उधर गुलाब चांद सोशलिस्ट, और फिर उसी हिसाब से मर्दों की बीवियां और बच्चे भी उसी पार्टी के थे। So with this we understand how layered and how heterogeneous families would be. There would be no political consensus even within the family as a unit. So, while the brother would be supporting one party, the father would be the adherent to another. The father would be adherent of another. So, there would not be consensus or there would not be a rabid following for anything up till a point, and then just before the partition the scenario changed for the worse, and it never actually recovered from that situation. With this, I am going to conclude today's lecture, and let us meet again for another round of discussions. Thank you.